Hello, I'm R.A. Spratt, and I've got some great news for Friday fans. Book 14 in the series, Friday Barnes, Nothing to Lose, is coming out in September. That's just next month. So I'm going to be holding 3 big book launches at theatres in Brisbane, Adelaide and Sydney. If you live near any of those cities, please come and see the show. I'll be reading from the new book, telling the stories behind the ideas, answering questions and signing your books. It's going to be a lot of fun. Tickets are on sale now. If you go to my website, rasprat.com, the links are all there. You just got to go to the banner and hit on the live shows tab. And make sure you get in there and get your tickets because they're going to go quickly. All right, that's it. Let's get on with the show. Hello and welcome to Bedtime Stories with me, R.A. Spratt. All right, well, it's been an absolutely gorgeous day here in Bowral. It's not spring quite yet, but the weather hasn't been told that because the weather was very spring-like today and the flowers are starting to come out. You know, any day now we'll be getting the baby ducks and it was just gorgeous. Now, I have been incredibly busy. We're just coming into Book Week, the proper actual week of Book Week. So I'm flying down to Melbourne tomorrow because I'm visiting schools and a library in Melbourne over the next from Monday to Friday. And the last week or two I've been in Sydney visiting schools. So it's been very, very busy, full on. Doing 3 presentations a day is really full on. And I've been staying in hotels and driving, and I'm not very good at driving. I tend to get sleepy. So it's been pretty exhausting. I've had lots of work. So every weekend I come home and I have to catch up on my paperwork and I have to try and get the podcast done. And it's all sort of caught up with me this weekend and I started to get sick. And I have so many presentations to do in the next week. I have from Monday to Wednesday alone, I'm visiting 6 schools and doing, 2 presentations at each one. So I really needed to spend this weekend looking after myself and also spending some time with my family because I've been away so much. So I was not able to finish writing the podcast episode for this week. At the moment, I'm writing the story of Achilles when he finally confronts Hector for killing his best friend. And, it's good. I've written half of it and it's going to be a great episode. But I just thought I needed to sleep in and get some rest and for the big week ahead. And I wasn't able to finish that. So then I had to debate, well, what am I going to do for this week's episode? Should I play a rerun? I've got an extract of the next Friday Barnes audiobook that's coming out. And that's going to be next week's episode. But I thought, no, it should be next week's episode because that's when the audiobook actually comes out. But then I started to think about a long time ago, when I was coming up with ideas for the podcast and I was looking for stories that Nanny Piggins could retell, one of the stories I looked at was the Just So stories by Rudyard Kipling. And because I always read them as a girl, and Rikki Tikki Tavi and all these stories that Rudyard Kipling wrote for children. And if you're wondering who Rudyard Kipling is, he wrote The Jungle Book. And I actually mentioned him quite a while back in an episode when I was talking all about vegetarian spiders and wind-blown tofu being sent into spiders' webs. And at the end, I mentioned that I'd done some research and there actually is a vegetarian spider and it's called the Bagheera Kiplingi, which is named after Rudyard Kipling and his fictional character Bagheera. Anyway, I totally digress. I do love a digression. But so I was thinking, I should do some Rudyard Kipling stories as told by Nanny Piggins for the podcast. This was a couple of years ago. And I ordered a collection of the Just So stories from my local bookshop, the Bookshop Bowral. And it came in and I read them because I hadn't read them. My mother read them to me as a child. And when I read them, I realised they weren't really suitable for adapting into Nanny Piggins stories because they were already so good, number one, and also really funny. And the thing is, when I adapt stories into Nanny Piggins stories, I'm a comedy writer, so I want to make a funny story. And if you're adapting something to make a funny story, actually, ironically, what you really need is a serious story. To make a serious story funny anyway, that's how it works. If you're a comedy writer, it's much easier to make a serious story into a funny story. You can't really transform a funny story into a funny story because really Rudyard Kipling's already done a better job than I would do. So I thought, I should just read you Rudyard Kipling's version. It's out of copyright, so I can do that. And it's just such a beautiful story. And he's a great, great storyteller in written form because he does all these amazing things with rhythm and assonance and alliteration. Assonance and alliteration, they're sort of like, how you have rhyme where the ending of words are the same. Well, assonance and alliteration, that's when the middle or the beginning of words sounds the same. So he uses all these sort of repetition techniques that no editor would let you do today. Like when you write a book today, editors are always going through and they're taking out anything where there's repetition. So anyway, I was reading this story and thinking it's just too good for me to change into a Nanny Piggins story. So I just left it alone. And this was a couple of years ago. And now here I find myself at home today and I'm a bit sick. And I know I shouldn't wear myself out by trying to write a new story because I should look after myself. And I was thinking, what am I going to do? And then I thought, this book has been sitting on my bedside table for about 2 or 3 years. And I thought, well, how about this week be the week where I read Rudyard Kipling's story? So I'm going to read my absolute favourite one from when I was a little girl, and it's called The Elephant's Child. Okay, just one more thing before we get into it. If you're listening to this and you're listening closely, you may hear in the background some pulsating beats. And you may think, is R.A. Spratt trying to do some sort of African sound effects to give mood to her story? No, it's nothing as sophisticated as that. What's happening is one of my neighbours has turned 60 and he's having a birthday party. And he lives about 50 metres from my house, because it's a small town. Everyone knows everybody, so I know that this is the case. And he's having a party and he's playing music quite loudly, so you can just sort of hear that. I don't know if you'll be able to hear it through the microphone, but I can certainly hear it as I'm sitting here. But there's nothing I can do because I've got to go fly to Melbourne tomorrow, so this is my last chance to record this episode. So we're just going to persevere. And we're going to pretend that his 60th birthday party music is all part of my African soundscape. All right, well, let's get into it. This is one of my favourite stories when I was a little girl, Rudyard Kipling's story, The Elephant's Child. In the high and far-off times, the elephant, O best beloved, had no trunk. He had only a blackish, bulgy nose, as big as a boot, that he could wriggle about from side to side. But he couldn't pick up things with it. But there was one elephant, a new elephant, an elephant's child, who was full of satiable curiosity, and that meant he asked ever so many questions. And he lived in Africa, and he filled all Africa with his satiable curiosities. He asked his tall aunt the ostrich why her tail feathers grew just so, and his tall aunt the ostrich spanked him with her hard, hard claw. He asked his tall uncle the giraffe what made his skin spotty, and his tall uncle the giraffe spanked him with his hard, hard hoof. And still he was full of satiable curiosity. He asked his broad aunt, the hippopotamus, why her eyes were red, and his broad aunt, the hippopotamus, spanked him with her broad, broad hoof. And he asked his hairy uncle, the baboon, why melons tasted just so, and his hairy uncle, the baboon, spanked him with his hairy, hairy paw. And still he was full of satiable curiosity. He asked questions about everything that he saw or heard or felt or smelt or touched, and his uncles and his aunts spanked him. And still he was full of satiable curiosity. One fine morning, in the middle of the procession of the equinoxes, this satiable elephant's child asked a new, fine question that he had never asked before. He asked, "What does the crocodile have for dinner?" Then everybody said, "Hush!" in a loud and dreadful tone, and they spanked him immediately and directly, without stopping, for a long time. By and by, when that was finished, he came upon a colo bird sitting in the middle of a wait-a-bit thorn bush, and he said, "My father has spanked me, and my mother has spanked me, and all my aunts and uncles have spanked me for my satiable curiosity, and still I want to know what the crocodile has for dinner." Then Colo Bird said, with a mournful cry, "Go to the banks of the great grey green greasy Limpopo River, all set about with fever trees, and find out." That very next morning, when there was nothing left of the equinoxes, because the procession had proceeded, according to the precedent, this satiable elephant's child took 100 pounds of bananas, the little short red kind, and 100 pounds of sugar cane, the long purple kind, and 17 melons, the greeny crackly kind, and said to all his dear families, "Goodbye, I am going to the great grey green greasy Limpopo River, all set about with fever trees, to find out what the crocodile has for dinner." And they all spanked him once more for luck, though he asked them most politely to stop. Then he went away, a little warm, but not at all astonished, eating melons and throwing the rind about, because he could not pick it up. He went from Grahamstown to Kimberley, and from Kimberley to Karma's country, and from Karma's country he went east by north, eating melons all the time, till at last he came to the banks of the great grey-green, greasy Limpopo River, all set about with fever trees, precisely as Colo Colo Bird had said. Now, you must know and understand, O best beloved, that till that very week, and day, and hour, and minute, this satiable elephant's child had never seen a crocodile, and did not know what one was like. It was all his satiable curiosity. The first thing that he found was a bi-coloured python rock snake curled around a rock. "Excuse me," said the elephant's child most politely, "but have you seen such a thing as a crocodile in these promiscuous parts?" "Have I seen a crocodile?" said the bi-coloured python rock snake, in a voice of dreadful scorn. "What will you ask me next?" "Excuse me," said the elephant's child, "but could you kindly tell me what he has for dinner?" Then the bi-coloured python rock snake uncoiled himself very quickly from the rock and spanked the elephant's child with his scalesome, flailsome tail. "That is odd," said the elephant's child, "because my father and my mother and my uncle and my aunt, not to mention my other aunt, the hippopotamus, and my other uncle, the baboon, have all spanked me for my satiable curiosity, and I suppose this is the same thing." So he said good-bye very politely to the bi-coloured python rock snake, and helped to coil him up on the rock again, and went on, a little warm, but not at all astonished, eating melons and throwing the rind about, because he could not pick it up, till he trod on what he thought was a log of wood at the very edge of the great grey-green, greasy Limpopo River, all set about with fever trees. But it was really the crocodile, O best beloved, and the crocodile winked one eye like this. "Excuse me," said the elephant's child, most politely, "but do you happen to have seen a crocodile in these promiscuous parts?" Then the crocodile winked the other eye and lifted half his tail out of the mud, and the elephant's child stepped back most politely because he did not wish to be spanked again. "Come hither, little one," said the crocodile. "Why do you ask such things?" "Excuse me," said the elephant's child, most politely, "but my father has spanked me, my mother has spanked me, not to mention my tall aunt the ostrich, and my tall uncle the giraffe, who can kick ever so hard, as well as my broad aunt the hippopotamus, and my hairy uncle the baboon, and including the bi-coloured python rock snake with a scalesome, flailsome tail just up the bank, who spanks harder than any of them. And so, if it's quite all the same with you, I don't want to be spanked any more." "Come hither, little one," said the crocodile, "for I am the crocodile." And he wept crocodile tears to show it was quite true. Then the elephant's child grew all breathless and panted and kneeled down on the bank and said, "You are the very person I have been looking for all these long days. Will you please tell me what you have for dinner?" "Come hither, little one," said the crocodile, "and I'll whisper." Then the elephant's child put his head down close to the crocodile's musky, tusky mouth, and the crocodile caught him by his little nose, which, up till that very week, day, hour, and minute, had been no bigger than a boot, though much more useful. "I think," said the crocodile, and he said it between his teeth like this, "I think today I will begin with Elephant's Child." At this, O best beloved, the elephant's child was much annoyed, and he said, speaking through his nose like this,
"Let go! You are hurting me!"
Then the bicoloured python rock snake scuffled down from the bank and said, "My young friend, if you do not immediately now, instantly, pull as hard as ever you can, it is my opinion that your acquaintance in the large patterned leather ulster," and by this he meant the crocodile, "will jerk you into yonder limpid stream before you can say Jack Robinson." This is the way bicoloured python rock snakes always talk. Then the elephant's child sat back on his little haunches and pulled and pulled and pulled, and his nose began to stretch. And the crocodile floundered into the water, making it all creamy with great sweeps of his tail, and he pulled and pulled and pulled. And the elephant's child's nose kept on stretching, and the elephant's child spread all his little 4 legs and pulled and pulled and pulled, and his nose kept on stretching. And the crocodile threshed his tail like an oar, and he pulled and pulled and pulled. And at each pull, the elephant's child's nose grew longer and longer, and it hurt him just. Then the elephant's child felt his legs slipping, and he said through his nose, which was now nearly 5 feet long,
"This is too much for me."
Then the bicoloured python rock snake came down from the bank and knotted himself in a double clove hitch around the elephant's child's hind legs and said, "Rash and inexperienced traveller, we will now seriously devote ourselves to a little high tension, because if we do not, it is my impression that yonder self-propelled man of war with the armour-plated upper deck," and by this, O best beloved, he meant the crocodile, "will permanently vitiate your future career." That is the way all bicoloured python rock snakes always talk. So he pulled, and the elephant's child pulled, and the crocodile pulled, but the elephant's child and the bicoloured python rock snake pulled hardest, and at last the crocodile let go of the elephant's child's nose with a plop that you could hear all up and down the Limpopo. Then the elephant's child sat down most hard and sudden, but first he was very careful to say, "Thank you," to the bicoloured python rock snake, and next he was kind to his poor pulled nose, and wrapped it up all in cool banana leaves, and hung it in the great grey-green greasy Limpopo to cool. "What are you doing that for?" said the bicoloured python rock snake. "Excuse me," said the elephant's child, "but my nose is badly out of shape, and I am waiting for it to shrink." "Then you will wait a long time," said the bicoloured python rock snake. "Some people do not know what is good for them." The elephant's child sat there for 3 days, waiting for his nose to shrink, but it never grew any shorter. And besides, it made him squint. For, O best beloved, you will see and understand that the crocodile had pulled it out into a really, truly trunk, same as all elephants have today. At the end of the 3rd day, a fly came and stung him on the shoulder, and before he knew what he was doing, he lifted up his trunk and hit that fly dead with the end of it. "Vantage number 1, said the bicoloured python rock snake. "You couldn't have done that with a mere smear nose. Now, try and eat a little." Before he could think what he was doing, the elephant's child put out his trunk and plucked a large bundle of grass, dusted it clean against his forelegs, and stuffed it into his own mouth. "Vantage number 2, said the bicoloured python rock snake. "You couldn't have done that with a mere smear nose. Don't you think the sun is very hot here?" "It is," said the elephant's child, and before he thought what he was doing, he slooped up a sloop of mud from the banks of the great grey-green greasy Limpopo and slapped it on his own head, where it made a cool, sloopy, sloshy mudcap, all trickly behind his ears. "Vantage number 3, said the bicoloured python rock snake. "You couldn't have done that with a mere smear nose. Now, how do you feel about being spanked again?" "Excuse me," said the elephant's child, "but I should not like it at all." "How would you like to spank somebody?" said the bi-coloured python rock snake. "I should like it very much," said the elephant's child. "Well," said the bi-coloured python rock snake, "you will find that new nose of yours very useful to spank people with." "Thank you," said the elephant's child. "I'll remember that. And now I think I'll go home to all my dear families and try." So the elephant's child went home across Africa, frisking and whisking his trunk. When he wanted fruit to eat, he pulled fruit down from a tree instead of waiting for it to fall as he used to do. When he wanted grass, he plucked grass up from the ground instead of going on his knees as he used to do. When the flies bit him, he broke off the branch of a tree and used it as a fly whisk, and he made himself a new, cool, slushy, squashy mudcap whenever the sun was hot. When he felt lonely walking through Africa, he sang to himself down his trunk, and the noise was louder than several brass bands. He went especially out of his way to find a broad hippopotamus. She was no relation of his, and he spanked her very hard to make sure that the bi-coloured python rock snake had spoken the truth about his new trunk. The rest of the time he picked up the melon rinds that he had dropped on his way to the Limpopo, for he was a tidy pachyderm. One dark evening he came back to all his dear families, and he coiled up his trunk and said, "How do you do?" They were all very glad to see him, and immediately said, "Come here and be spanked for your satiable curiosity." "Pooh," said the elephant's child, "I don't think you peoples know anything about spanking. But I do, and I'll show you." Then he uncurled his trunk and knocked two of his dear brothers head over heels. "Oh, bananas," said they. "Where did you learn that trick? And what have you done to your nose?" "I got a new one from the crocodile on the banks of the great grey-green, greasy Limpopo," said the elephant's child. "I asked him what he had for dinner, and he gave me this to keep." "It looks very ugly," said his hairy uncle, the baboon. "It does," said the elephant's child, "but it's very useful." And he picked up his hairy uncle, the baboon, by one hairy leg and hove him into a hornet's nest. Then that bad elephant's child spanked all his dear families for a long time, till they were very warm and greatly astonished. He pulled out his tall ostrich aunt's tail feathers, and he caught his tall uncle the giraffe by the hind leg and dragged him through a thorn bush. And he shouted at his broad aunt the hippopotamus and blew bubbles into her ears when she was sleeping in the water after meals. But he never let anyone touch Colo Colo Bird. At last things grew so exciting that his dear families went off one by one in a hurry to the banks of the great grey-green, greasy Limpopo River, all set about with fever trees, to borrow new noses from the crocodile. When they came back, nobody spanked anybody any more, and ever since that day, oh best beloved, all the elephants you will ever see, besides all those that you won't, have trunks precisely like the trunk of the satiable elephant's child. All right, and we'll leave it there. So there you go. That's an example of the type of story I used to love when I was a kid. And maybe you can see how, with the humour in that story and the use of rhythm and language, how that would have inspired the type of stories that I write. All right, well, that's it for now. Next week, we're going to have a Friday Barn story. And the week after that, we'll come back with the Iliad and the story of Achilles confronting Hector. All right, well, that's it for now. Until next week, goodbye. Hello, it's me again. If you enjoyed listening to Bedtime Stories with R.A. Spratt, it would be really helpful if you could like, subscribe, follow, and or review the show on whatever podcast platform you're listening to now. Every little one of those digital affirmations helps, and the bigger this podcast gets, the more I can justify procrastinating from my real job to keep bringing these stories to you. Thank you.